world building for fantasy fiction is a challenge when the fantasy world and the real world are to be linked and superimposed. Under that conditions, Neil Gaiman has pulled off a masterpiece, and that novel is fantasy fiction American Gods. The book is based on the fantasy or the premise that gods live among us. Like the gods take the shapes which we give them, and through the rituals, the sacrifices, and the religious practices, and most importantly through prayer, gods derive power. When modern humans started migrating towards the American continents, they came from different parts of the world, from China, from India, from England, from France, from West Africa, from Southern Africa, everywhere. So when people arrived in America, they did bring in their religious practices, their folklore, and their spiritual beliefs. So when they do their prayers and sacrifices in the American continent, gods are also brought into the Americas. But with one challenge. See, change is the only constant, and even though the gods were brought into the Americas, the old gods were eventually forgotten with time. Especially after the advent of Industrial Revolution, you have new gods rising up. For example, you have the gods of iron and steel, the goddess of television. For the goddess of television to thrive, time is a sacrifice. The more time you spend in front of television, the stronger the goddess gets. We have gods of credit cards, gods of cancer. So this novel is about the struggle for supremacy between the old gods and the new gods in America. Now, as the idea is original, the book immediately sucks you into it. We go through the story usually with the eyes of the protagonist, a person named Shadow, and we have his mentor, Mr. Wednesday, who's actually his boss, and he's one of the important old gods who kind of directs kind of a truce between the old gods and the new gods. So we get to see what finally happens, whether a truce is signed or does both the gods go to war. Now, as the story outline and the premise is done, there are definitely 4 to 5 major points I'd like to discuss. First is the research done by author Neil Gaiman, because he has to get the folklore of Japan to Scotland to India authentic. He needs to make sure that the description is definitely meeting the eye, because you have readers from all over the world and you do not want to have any pitfalls. An author really surprised me with the description of Lord Ganesh, the Hindu god, when he was riding a huge rat. The second aspect of the book was how gods live among humans, laboriously working hard, doing hard labor, because they've really lost their powers, because it's been a long time in America that people remember their old gods and sacrifices are made. So they do all sorts of menial jobs, and there were times in which you pity the gods who used to be so powerful are actually leading a life, trying to, scrape for money. One of the short segments which I liked was how the gods pull off a bank heist, because at the end of the day you need money. So that was a very interesting instance which I liked. Now, the third point was critical. It was primarily about violence and sacrifice. Now, if you look at it from the ethical perspective, you can get several dimensions on acceptable and non-acceptable terms on how you want to really address the question of sacrifice and violence so that your prayers get satisfied. And the fourth was about maybe a postmodern concept about the impact of globalization on religion in general. Now, if you take maybe a 200 years or 250 years earlier, it was not that each section of the world was connected or was impacted by events which go on in one part of the world. So every small village, it can be a place in Central Africa, or it can be a mountainous hamlet in Argentina, or maybe it is a small hamlet in Ukraine. Now, wherever you go, they have their own local folklore, right? They have their own gods. So with increasing globalization and with more urbanization, as people leave their rural areas and then move towards their urban environment, which is happening globally. Like globally, we've already exceeded 50% urban population. So in that circumstances, the local tradition, the local folklore, the local deities are actually forgotten, and there is focus towards few gods, no matter which religion you follow. So that was an interesting theme, which is it's not directly mentioned in the book, but you kind of get the idea with several chapters. And fifth again is open to the reader. It was regarding the soul of America itself. Now, when you say that the the old gods are forgotten, do we mean to say that the tradition of the Native Americans are forgotten and that they're getting lost in the new amalgamation of this country, United States of America, which has been created? It's not that the book is without flaws. There were certain chapters, especially at the end, which I did feel maybe it went on, it dragged on, but that is not an excuse to not read this book. So if you want to immerse yourself in great fantasy fiction, this is definitely a recommendation. Bye for now.